Alcatraz, America's most infamous maximum security prison, was designed to be escape-proof. But on a clear, cool night in the summer of 1962, 3 prisoners did make it off the island, and then vanished without trace. The escape had taken months of detailed planning and preparation. So how did they do it? This is the remarkable true story of the escape as told by the guards and the prisoners who were on Alcatraz at that time.
John came to me about 6 months before they left and asked me if I would help get some tools. Yeah, I knew they were planning an escape.
The FBI declared that the prisoners had probably drowned in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay, but no bodies were ever recovered. So what really happened to these 3 men? We build a raft like the one the prisoners made to cross the treacherous waters.
Quick, sharp breath, and it's back up to speed. Paddle, paddle, paddle.
Would 3 Coast Guards succeed in this makeshift raft? Or would the frigid waters get the better of them? We reveal new clues about the fate of the 3 men responsible for the most famous breakout in American prison history, which would be immortalized in a Hollywood movie, Escape from Alcatraz. At dawn on June the 12th, 1962, the guards at Alcatraz were in for a nasty shock. 3 prisoners could not be woken up, or so it seemed.
My head was up against the bars, and I didn't notice that it was a fake head until I reached in and hit the pillow and went off on the floor. That's the first indication that I had. I mean, I'll tell you, it scared me. I jumped back about 4 feet.
When the alarm went off, I immediately reported to my boat. We go around and around and around the island, looking and looking for the little caves and everything. We picked up a lot of debris that belonged to them.
The escape triggered the greatest manhunt in San Francisco's history, as agents of the FBI, Coast Guardsmen, Highway Patrol, sheriff's deputies, and local police joined in the search.
The huge dragnet was turning up precious little. Apart from the discovery of wreckage from what seemed to be a rubber raft, there were no plausible sightings and no recovered bodies.
There was no cars stolen, no burglaries, no clothing stores broken into, no holdups that could be attributed to them. What I mean by that is those things happened, but they were solved and somebody else did the crime.
Inside Alcatraz itself, the convicts' code of silence had descended like a San Francisco fog. The only one prepared to talk to the FBI was a 4th convict in the escape team, Alan West, who somehow had been left behind. He claimed that the escape was his idea, which came to him after a stint in the Rock's notorious punishment wing.
I'd gotten out of the hole about May 5th last year. Started thinking about ways of breaking out.
West cast himself as the brains behind the plot. But could he really have been the architect of such a brilliantly planned escape? Alan Clayton West had first been sent to Alcatraz in 1957 and came with a reputation for violence and repeated escape attempts. His aggressive nature meant that he endured even more tedious hours in his cell than the other prisoners. But it was time he spent dreaming of breaking out from the solid concrete and steel tomb that encased him. Alcatraz was designed to house the prisoners other prisons couldn't control. Its reputation for being escape-proof stemmed not just from the vicious currents that swirled around the island, but from the architecture itself.
The cell house contained 4 freestanding blocks. Each one contains several dozen cells, back to back, stacked 3 high.
At the back of the cells, and behind 8-inch thick concrete walls, ran a narrow corridor crammed with service pipes, that led all the way to the top of the cell block.
The entire cell house is constructed by convict labor. As a result, the workmanship in here varies, and so does the quality of the concrete. In some areas, the concrete is still very strong, very sturdy. You get down here closer to the bottom, it starts to be a little different.
This was the beginning of an escape route that would lead all the way out of Alcatraz and straight into an unsolved mystery. Did the three prisoners survive the treacherous waters of the San Francisco Bay and make it to freedom? Alan West's violent reputation meant that he was unpopular with the guards at Alcatraz and was given the worst jobs, like cleaning dust and debris from the corridor behind his own cell.
All right. Get everything.
I'll holler when I'm done, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
It gave him a unique opportunity to search for any weak points in the cell house's concrete defenses. West stumbled onto something that a prisoner in Alcatraz could only dream of finding. Hidden away near a ventilation grill was a set of rusty saw blades and files wrapped in oil paper. They'd probably been abandoned after a previous escape attempt. During the months that led up to the escape, Jolene Babiak, the daughter of an Alcatraz official, was living on the island.
West had access to that area where they eventually escaped out of. It was his idea. I truly believe that it was his idea, and he brought everybody in on the deal.
Corridors at each time. It's narrow, pipes left and right.
Wait, Thomas. Have you seen this corridor? No, it goes up there, all the way up.
West first talked about his plan to two brothers, John and Clarence Anglin. Both were good swimmers and physically strong, but neither was what you'd call a thinker. John Anglin, or J.W. as he was known, was a bungling bank robber who'd also found his way to Alcatraz through attempted escapes from other penitentiaries. He arrived on Alcatraz in October 1960.
John had about a third-grade educational level, so John could multiply, but he couldn't divide. His brother Clarence reportedly had a fifth-grade educational level, which is about age 10.
Clarence Anglin joined his elder brother John on Alcatraz in January 1961.
They were mostly the kinds of guys that broke into gas stations at night, and they robbed a bank in Alabama, which had the death penalty for bank robbery.
Blades.
Blades.
What?
What?
Blades.
What the hell blades you around?
So West recognized some cool cats when he, saw them and pulled them in on the deal.
Talking it over with John Anglin, I realized he was already thinking about an escape. He said he could get through a ventilation shaft onto the roof. So we got talking about how to break out, swim to the mainland.
And when we get off without the water, how do we get across the whole thing? Steal some raft or something?
Rain jackets.
People put a rain jacket to swim across? Where are you from again, Wes?
Then in December, Frank Morris joined us.
Welcome to Alcatraz, Frank.
Wish I could say it was good to be here.
The escape team was now complete. Frank Lee Morris had a rap sheet for narcotics and robbery that stretched all the way back to his early teens. He arrived on Alcatraz in January 1960, with a reputation for being the Harry Houdini of the American prison system. He tried to escape from every single institution that incarcerated him. Only the escape-proof rock could contain him, or so the theory went.
Frank Morris, he was later portrayed by Clint Eastwood, and of course he was very Clint Eastwood-like. He was handsome and had a full head of hair and very bright.
Still reading that Bible?
Oh yeah, it's opening up all kinds of new doors.
But even among witnesses who were on Alcatraz Island on the night of the escape, there is no agreement about who exactly came up with the plan.
Even the movie that Clint Eastwood made, giving Frank Morris the credit of masterminding that, didn't happen. John Anglin put it all together.
I think it was West's idea. West was maintenance, and this was a maintenance escape.
Morris was really the brains. He had the brains doing it. He's the one that really had the guiding light for him, told him what to do and how to do it.
Escape from Alcatraz reinforces the idea that it was Frank Morris who was the mastermind. Alan West is portrayed as little more than a barely competent follower, and is given a less than flattering name in the movie, as if to underline the point.
What's your name, kid?
Charlie Butts.
Charlie's Butt?
Butts. Butts. Charlie Butts.
You got a funny friggin' name, kid.
Yeah, what's your name?
Al Capone.
But there is evidence throughout the months of planning for the escape that it was Alan West who initiated the plan, and who made it possible. Morris certainly contributed, but so did the two Anglin brothers. Phase 1 of the escape began when Clarence Anglin worked out how to make chisels out of spoons, stolen from the mess hall.
Clarence had gotten hold of a spoon, made a few dents in the cement next to his ventilator. So, the rest of us got more spoons. We filed them down like a screwdriver and started to make holes in the cement.
From now on, the four convicts worked together as a well-drilled team.
We all worked after the 5:30 count. I worked on through till the 9:30 count.
Their first task was to dig holes through the cement surrounding small air vents at the back of their cells. They could then break into the corridor and climb onto the top of the cell block.
Usually, when they were working, they did it during the music hour in the evening from 6 till 7, so where we played our instruments in the cell. So there was a lot of noise in the cell house.
You're clear, Frankie.
The cells of the two Anglin brothers were next to each other, and Morris's cell was next to mine.
How's it coming, J-Dub? It's moving. Won't be much longer, we'll be out of this place. Just keep on digging.
One evening, one of the Anglin brothers would watch while the other worked. And the next evening, they would change positions. Morris and me used the same method.
Hey, wait. Yeah, try to keep it down, though.
Cement rubble from the digging was carefully flushed away. And as the holes got larger and harder to conceal, all four started to build fake grills, which were so well made that the guards never once suspected. Morris and the Anglins were now working outside their cells at night, timing their brief absences between hourly head counts by the guards. They opened up a workshop on top of the cell block, where they began to make fake heads, designed to fool the guards into thinking their cells were occupied. The workshop was no more than 10 meters from an observation gallery, and would normally have been in plain sight of the guards. But a brilliant piece of psychological trickery by Alan West had made the workshop invisible.
Right in that area is where the Anglin brothers and Morris set up their shop, where they fabricated their escape equipment. West had been working on a project painting the cell house.
West had a very clever trick. He went up there and he swept off the top of the block, and all the dust fell on the floor. Well, if you look at any photograph of Alcatraz, what you see is that concrete floor was absolutely polished. You could have eaten off the floor. And when West sweeps the dust off, everybody gets upset about it, and then he just says, well, it's really dirty up there and I've got to paint. Maybe I can just hang a couple of blankets up there.
And he got permission to hang about 3 dozen blankets over the bars. So, in effect, this area was entirely screened from the guards' views.
And those blankets stayed up there for 6 weeks until they escaped.
The workshop set up by West was well known to prisoners throughout the jail, who clearly supported the plan to break out. One of them was Darwin Kuhn.
John came to me about 6 months before they left and asked me if I would help get some tools.
They were able to get some items out of the hospital, like Band-Aids and things where you want to bridge a little gap across and then paint over the top of it. And the Anglin brothers were not talented in painting, believe me. And so they would contact other convicts and said, look, I need some help in this painting, and they would assist him.
But by far the biggest challenge was to build a raft that could carry them across the cold, treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. The better the raft, the better their chances of survival. But how, in a maximum security prison, do you even find the raw materials? The answer, again, was with the help of other prisoners, who handed over what became the fabric of the raft, their waterproof raincoats.
John Anglin said, do you have a raincoat? And I said, yeah. He said, I need it. So I wore it out and he wore it back in. So that's how they acquired the raincoats.
There was no restrictions on the amount of raincoats they could have. In our wildest dreams, we didn't dream that they were going to build water wings out of them, but they did, and they were pretty nice, not bad.
A supply line was now running between the cells and the workshop. The prisoners had collected over 50 raincoats, more than enough to build the raft and 4 life vests. West was the only one of the 4 who worked on the escape exclusively from his cell. The reason for this, according to his statement to the FBI, was that he'd accidentally made the hole from his cell so large that it could easily have been detected by the guards. His accomplices carried out repairs with smuggled concrete, but had left the hole so small that he couldn't get out.
West had pushed through his hole a little too much, and the Anglin brothers, he claimed, had to come in and put a little cement on there.
Up in the workshop, the Anglins took on most of the responsibility for building the raft.
The raft was about 14 feet by 6 feet. It had 15-inch pontoons around the edges and underneath.
But trapped in his cell, West couldn't have known for sure how big or how well made the raft was.
There are photographs. It does appear that they used a good glue, a water-soluble glue. It's even hand-stitched, which would not be a good thing, but there it is. It's glued and stitched. This is another reason why West might not have gone. He might have thought, I don't think I want to get in that raft.
By early June, the raft and other escape equipment were almost finished. After 6 months of preparation, the 4 convicts were finally ready to break out. Morris climbed down from the top of the cell block with big news.
It's water.
The escape could be on for that night.
Morris came down about 8:45, said the bars were out of the hole in the roof. He said he was thirsty, so I gave him some water. Morris told me they were going to go that night if they got the lid off the top of the ventilator. He said the bars below it were out of the way, and they should get the lid off by 9:30.
For some reason, West had waited until the night of the escape before trying to remove the concrete that still blocked him in his cell.
I think you have to wonder about someone who plans something actively for a year and then works on it for at least 6 months and then can't get out of his cell that night.
I tried to kick the rest of the cement out of the hole, but I couldn't do it. Clarence tried to help for a minute or so, but he couldn't do nothing.
Trying to West is useless.
No, it's not useless. We're gonna get this hole open.
You need a jackhammer to get through this thing.
I am going with you. This is my deal. I put this whole thing together.
So that may well be true, that they kind of did too good of a job and he couldn't push it out.
Morris returned to his cell one last time. He, West, and the Anglins had to be present for the 9:30 count, the last one before the cell house lights were turned off that night. The guards would continue their counts every hour throughout the night, but from now on, they were just checking sleeping heads in dark cells. This part of the escape brought them the most precious thing of all, time. If the night guards could be fooled by the fake heads, the alarm would not be raised until the first morning count. And by that time, Morris, West, and the Anglins planned to be far away. With little more than an hour to go before the escape, Morris and the Anglins were busy making final preparations. They had to pack everything, including the raft, so that it could be carried comfortably over the obstacle course that lay ahead. Would 6 months of painstaking planning result in freedom? Or a painful death in San Francisco Bay? We built a raft based on the one the prisoners used and put it to the test.
I still wouldn't trust my life with this.
Four prisoners were planning an escape from America's most infamous prison. They dug holes out of the back of the cells, made fake grills and fake heads, and built a raft to cross the water. Tonight was going to be the big night, the culmination of all their planning and hard work. But West was still unable to break through the new concrete in his cell.
What's this supposed to do?
Morris returned to West's cell with an improvised crowbar. He promised to bring the Anglin brothers down for one last push, and climbed back to the top of the cell block.
You hang in there. Put it back.
West would never see him again.
Morris left to get Clarence to help clear out the hole. This was at 9:37, and that was the last I heard or saw of them.
Was West really still trapped? Or was this the moment that he finally lost his nerve? 3 stories above him, Morris and the Anglins were ready to break out onto the roof. This shouldn't have been too hard, because John Anglin had spent weeks sawing through the screws that secured the ventilator cover. The way to the roof was now clear, though they still ran the risk of being seen from the only building that overlooked the cell house.
You could be seen by anyone who's in the lighthouse. It was actually a lighthouse keeper. It was a calculated risk. Again, people weren't expecting this to be a place where anyone would be escaping from, so this wasn't an area of intense surveillance. This is where the vent was, where Morris and the Anglins actually came out. There was a circular steel ventilator cap right here, just like the other ones that are dotting the roof. As soon as they got out, we have to base this on the evidence photographed by the FBI. They seem to have come out of the vents, taken as little time as possible, probably gathered their gear up, and then in a straight line headed that way, which was the very far end of the whole prison building. furthest away from the manned guard tower in sort of a dead spot visually.
We're almost there.
The next part of the escape route would test their strength and their nerve.
There was a big vent pipe that paralleled the wall. They climbed over and just slid all the way down to the pavement.
There were no signs that any of them was injured in this 15-meter descent to the ground. Amazingly, for a high-security jail, there were now just a couple of 4-meter-high fences to climb. Six months of planning had got them successfully through all of the rock's maximum security obstacles, except one. They arrived at a little-used path on the northeast of Alcatraz and began inflating their raft and improvised life vests. Almost 3 kilometers away, and directly in their line of sight on a clear moonlit evening, was the deserted shoreline of Angel Island. Within seconds of stepping off from Alcatraz, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers would have felt the awesome power and frigid temperatures of the waters in San Francisco Bay. And that is the last that we know of them. West told the FBI that he did finally break through into the corridor where Morris had left a fake head for him, nicknamed Oink. When he reached the top of the cell block, all he found among the remains of the workshop was a spare life vest and a second but only partially completed raft. Now alone on the roof, West had to figure out whether he still had a chance of catching up with the other three. But all he could see was open water. There was no sign of a raft moving away to Angel Island. This was the end of West's hope of escape. He would spend the rest of his life in jail.
When they got to the mainland, they said they'd steal guns and clothes and a car. Just get as far away as they could. But none of us ever said where we'd go.
Even if Alan West were not the sole mastermind of the escape, it would certainly not have been possible without him. All he was left with now were his dreams of what might have been, after the most ingenious breakout in the rock's turbulent history. But the enduring mystery of the escape from Alcatraz is the fate of the other three men.
They planned on going to Angel Island. Less chance of getting caught there.
"5 days after the escape, a postcard arrived at the San Francisco office of the FBI. It had 3 signatures, Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. And a message, "Ha ha, we made it." However, neither fingerprints nor handwriting on the card could be matched to the escapers.
Whatever their fate, the 3 convicts have apparently accomplished a feat that many have tried with no success.
After an intensive manhunt, the FBI believed that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers must have drowned in San Francisco Bay. Wreckage from their raft was the only trace they left behind, and it seemed to support the FBI's position. But after such a carefully planned breakout, isn't it at least possible that the escapers actually made it to the mainland? If they did make it, they would have succeeded in overcoming a huge force of nature, the waters of San Francisco Bay. Ralph Cheng has studied the powerful tides for decades. If Angel Island was their destination, he believes they would have faced one overwhelming problem. And the evidence for that can be found here, at a huge model that mimics tidal movements in and out of the bay.
Of course, I heard a story being passed around in the prison where that they plan to escape from Alcatraz here and swim over to Angel Island. Tide would be sweeping from east towards the west.
Angel Island lies almost directly north of Alcatraz. It's 2.8 kilometers away, but can look a lot closer. At precisely the time the escapers got into the raft, the tide had just begun to run out of the bay. Trying to row north, with the tide running east to west, would have been a tough challenge in any circumstances. But the tides are especially strong in the bay, and would have pushed them hard in the direction of the Golden Gate Bridge, almost 5 kilometers to the west of Alcatraz.
We're going to put in a drifter representing the body of entering the water here. I'm trying to put it on the east side of Alcatraz. I think if they change their mind in the last minute, they notice that now current actually is moving from Alcatraz towards the Golden Gate. If you just don't struggle against the current, just ride with the flow, so to speak, then you will be drifting along with the currents toward the Golden Gate area in about 1.5 to 2 hours or so.
It's possible that they did decide not to fight the tide and drift down to the Golden Gate, but the sweeping tides wouldn't have been the only problem they faced that night.
Probably the most important weather factor were the winds. The winds were 10 to 15 miles per hour coming right through the gate, pushing probably some light waves in toward Angel Island. From Alcatraz onto Angel Island is almost due north, so it's almost going to be a quartering wind, very much like this wind that I'm standing in right now. It would be pushing on their left sides.
This means that the winds on the night of the escape would have been hitting the three men from exactly the opposite direction to the tides. And these winds might have been strong enough to counteract the tidal effects. But whether the tide or the wind was the greater force depends on the answer to an important question. Were the men sitting above the water in a well-made raft, or were they partially submerged, clinging onto a poorly performing flotation device?
If they are totally on top of the surface of the water on a raft, not down in the water swimming, then the wind is going to be a bigger factor than the tide. It's probably going to be like a 3-to-1 ratio. If they're down in the water, the tide's going to have that bigger ratio.
So just how good was the raft? Good enough to carry them safely to land, or a fast-sinking liability? The only way to test this is to try to build a raft using the same materials as those available to the escapers. Like the Anglin brothers, Jamie Schmidt is a skilled carpenter. Working from his San Francisco garage, he will start with the same basic ingredients that they had: old rubber raincoats, waterproof cement, and cutting tools. He's also seen pictures of the remains of another raft left behind in the escapers' workshop, which reveals some detailed clues about its construction methods.
We've got some ponchos, some rain jackets. This is kind of all we could find that was somewhat original to the time. And I'm going to try to do that using rubber cement, maybe some contact cement, and some epoxy. So I really don't know how this and where this is all going to go, because I've never done this before. Each one of these has a different state of disrepair. This is what they had to deal with. I can imagine not seeing these ahead of time. You get out into the water and you'll discover that they're there in a very rude and abrupt way. I know that this is not airtight. It is useless to me. This might actually become a float. Oh, no! Doing this in the freezing cold with the ever-present thought that you're gonna get caught. This is a very good way of going about this, because we're doubling it up, and the rubber cement might be sealing those holes to make it watertight. And they did threading, and they did sewing, and they've done vulcanizing, which they used over the steam pipes, which is very clever. Look at that match. It's now officially one sheet.
Jamie has built a rubber version of a log raft with 3 pontoons strapped side by side to support the weight of 3 men.
I still wouldn't trust my life with this.
Before his raft is launched, he'll get a good idea about just how physically demanding the journey from Alcatraz to Angel Island really is. In tide and wind conditions close to those faced by Morris and the Anglins on that June night in 1962, we asked 3 U.S. Coast Guard officers to conduct a simple experiment. To find out how quickly, in the best possible circumstances, they can get to Angel Island. Matthew Crowe, Dan Strange, and Steve Murdoch know these waters well. They are extremely fit, have not had to endure years of prison food, and will row in a well-built modern rubber dinghy with the added protection of their wetsuits.
Ready? Yeah. Yep.
Even so, the tide has just started running out of the bay. The further they get towards Angel Island, the stronger the currents will drag them away and towards the Golden Gate Bridge.
Whew. I think you're aiming good, huh? We haven't hit the current yet, though. I'm glad I'm not doing this at night. Yeah. Plus, we're completely out of the water except for when you splashed me. No.
Just as on the night of the escape, the water temperature is in the mid-50s Fahrenheit.
If I didn't have like the wetsuit on or booties, my foot would be frozen right now.
Anyone immersed unprotected in these temperatures for more than an hour runs the risk of developing hypothermia, a drop in the human body's core temperature, which causes a loss of muscle coordination, mental confusion, and breathing difficulties. Without the prospect of immediate rescue, the onset of hypothermia could be fatal.
So what point does dehydration play an effect in this?
Exhaustion's gonna kick in first, between 30 and 60 minutes, and probably unconsciousness.
You guys are at 17 minutes! I feel like we're not getting any closer.
Now we are.
Are you guys hot or cold?
Medium.
Medium? At least you're not in jeans.
Not submerged in the water either.
Oh, wait till you see the raft that I built. You'd be thanking God you're on that. Yeah.
There's no way these guys made it. There just isn't. You just think about it, there's just no way. They're doing well, but they're all completely dry and in professional wetsuits on a professional boat, gliding along with professional paddles.
Oh, feel this current right here? Oh, look at it coming through right at us. Oh, I don't know if we're gonna get this.
Within just 100 meters of the Angel Island shoreline, they hit the fiercest currents of all.
Going this way, then we're gonna turn the nose back in.
They're being dragged powerfully away from the beach and have to put in a last big push to make it.
Oh, gosh.
Despite the seemingly short distance from Alcatraz to Angel Island, it's taken 3 extremely fit men in a well-built, lightweight dinghy nearly an hour to row just under 3 kilometers. So how would these 3 men fare in a recreation of the prisoner's raft? After 6 months of meticulous planning, 3 prisoners had broken free of their cells. When they made it to the shores of Alcatraz, they deployed a makeshift raft. But would it really be their passport to freedom?
Okay, you guys gotta promise not to laugh.
Jamie Schmidt reveals his raft. It's what he believes the prisoners must have built.
This is the raft. It has never hit water, so we're gonna blow this sucker up and see what we can do. This is awesome.
Unfortunately, the raft has lasted about 10 seconds.
There's no stability to something like this.
And the Coast Guard officers quickly have second thoughts. The raft is now little more than a flotation aid. It's quite possible that something like this actually happened. The raft might still have helped, but everything would now have been more difficult.
They've actually gotten much further than I thought they would. They've gotten pretty far, but it's exactly what I thought was going to happen. Oh no! Man overboard.
Jamie is now more nervous than amused and embarks on a rescue mission. With the escapers now immersed in the water, they would no longer have had the wind on their side, and the tide would also now be against them, making it all but impossible to reach Angel Island. After trying to swim towards the island, the prisoners would in time have become exhausted. They could then have begun drifting with the tide towards the Golden Gate. But the bridge is almost 5 kilometers away, and to cover this distance could have taken up to 2.5 hours. At a chilly 57 degrees Fahrenheit, it wouldn't have been long before hypothermia started to kick in.
It's going to take their breath right away. It's going to slow their heart rate down. You probably have about 30 minutes to 60 minutes in the water before you become exhausted and possibly unconscious. And overall survival time, probably between 1 to 3 hours.
The most likely outcome is that the 3 men succumbed to hypothermia, drowned, drifted under the Golden Gate Bridge, and washed away into the vastness of the Pacific Ocean.
There's no way that thing could have held together, and I think they went right down, and the water was 57 degrees, the tide's running at 6 knots an hour, and they just didn't make it.
They were prisoners, long-time convicts. They'd been locked up. Whatever exercise they had was what they could get down in the recreation yard. To do it totally cold, never having been in that water before, not knowing where you're going, the odds are overwhelmingly against you.
So is it just wishful thinking to believe they may still have beaten those odds? Perhaps not. 6 months later, during a stormy night in December 1962, 2 inmates broke out of the cell house.
John Paul Scott and Darrell D. Parker inherited an escape from somebody else who was transferred. They sawed their way through the what's called the basket bars, and they got out of the window. And Darrell D. Parker either sprained or broke his foot on the way down the cliff. And by the time he got down to the shore, John Paul Scott was gone. And Scott had used surgical gloves. So he had inflated these little gloves and basically floated to San Francisco. He wanted to go to the city. He ended up under the Golden Gate Bridge.
Scott had survived in waters that were much colder than in June. When he was discovered by teenagers on rocks below the Golden Gate, he was unable to move and was in deep shock from hypothermia. But Scott is the only prisoner known to have swum from Alcatraz to the mainland and lived. His reward for this feat was to be returned to Alcatraz on the prison boat. The case of John Paul Scott shows that one or more of the escapers could, in theory at least, have survived. But in all likelihood, Morris and the Anglin brothers succumbed to hypothermia and perished in the bay waters on that night of June the 11th, 1962. Their plan had been to steal guns, clothes and a car, but no such criminal activity was ever reported. And the postcard that at first suggested success was probably a hoax. If they did succeed, their ability to move without trace makes their achievement all the more remarkable. And if they are still alive today, the Anglins would be in their late 70s and Morris in his early 80s, still in hiding, still having the last laugh.
As far as I'm concerned, they escaped from here. I think they're still out there somewhere.